Hey folks, Matthew here. I hope you're all doing great. I got a bonus video for you about some of the gay British films or queer British films that followed in the wake of Victim, the topic of my recent YouTube video. So after Victim came out in the early 1960s, that was followed by a whole bunch of others like Leather Boys, Taste of Honey, If, Sunday Bloody Sunday over the next decade or so. So I want to talk a little bit more about those films and show you some of the gay highlights and perhaps lowlights. Also, I've got some gossip about Shirley Bassey, and surprising even myself, I have a take on the new Ghostbusters movie, so we got a lot to talk about. So after the movie Victim helped push open the door for having queer content in films in England in the early 60s, it was followed by a whole bunch of other movies. There had previously been some queer-ish content in films, but it had to be, kind of plausibly deniable. And movies after Victim, and I'm not saying Victim was the only reason, but Victim certainly helped. After Victim, there were a lot more films that felt more comfortable being a little bit more explicit. And these generally fall into the category of British New Wave or kitchen sink realism or kitchen sink drama. Kitchen sink was a style in the 50s, 60s that you can basically think of as like working class disillusionment. These were movies mostly focused, but not exclusively, on men who were at the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, who were expressing some hopelessness about their future and their lives. These movies were often rather sordid, rather depressing. They confronted the realities, the darker realities of especially working class British life in a way that, stiff upper lip drawing room dramas would never go near. And these movies are often, I find them rather a hard watch because they're, I wouldn't say exactly oppressive, but they don't leave you feeling optimistic. And it actually, watching these movies and learning more about them has really helped me understand the tradition that movies like Beautiful Thing come out of. Beautiful Thing I talked about in my recommendations video yesterday, a film from the 90s, very similarly. I think this Beautiful Thing would slot very nicely into this, early 60s kitchen sink style. It's another film about people who might feel like they don't have much of a future ahead of themselves, but Beautiful Thing ends on a much more upbeat note. I wouldn't say it's like a real laugh riot, but it ends on a much more upbeat note than a lot of the movies that I'm about to talk about. So we'll start with Taste of Honey, 1961. That's a film with Murray Melvin. I always forget his name. Murray Melvin playing a gay man. He's I believe, a fashion student who befriends a woman who's really going through it. There's a lot of drama about pregnancy and who she's, her mother, and like leaving the house and becoming a woman. Essentially, it's a movie about becoming a woman. Her horror, basically, that she's no longer a little girl and she doesn't know how to be an adult. So the character Murray befriends her and is supportive of her up to a point where there's not much more that he can do for her in her life. Like I said, these are movies that are rather sad, no other way to put it, but it's really interesting to see this gay, artistic gay character, sensitive and, talking openly about being homosexual. That's followed in 1964 by The Leather Boys, which also stars the same main actress, Rita Tushingham, which is a fun name. Leather Boys sounds like a gayer movie than it is. It's about a biker gang, and one of the members of the gang is gay, like just explicitly, openly gay. And a lot more so in I believe it's based on a play. It's toned down a bit for the film, but there's really no ambiguity. A couple interesting things about this one, about The Leather Boys, is that it concludes, there's a scene that's set in a gay pub, which is remarkable. It's very clearly a bar for gay men. So we get to see that. We get to see some minor flirtation at the end. And another interesting thing that I actually find a bit challenging is that a lot of the dialogue in this film was improvised. The actors made it up on the day, on set, or on location more often, because it was written in a way that nobody talks, and they wanted to give it more verisimilitude, and so they were like, look, nobody in London talks like this. Nobody of these classes speak this way, so we're just going to talk how we think they would talk.
Well, you ride a motor bicycle, do you, is it?
Yeah, I did. I just sold it.
We haven't seen you around here before.
No, it's my first trip.
And that's great. That's fascinating. It makes it a really valuable time capsule. It also means it's very difficult for me to understand. So I've got a version, I just got a Blu-ray version that has subtitles, so I'm going to have to watch it again with the subtitles because I think there's a lot that I miss when I watch it without them. Another really fascinating one is If from 1968, starring Malcolm McDowell. I made the mistake of at one point watching this. I had it, I think I had a version I downloaded from online that was subtitled, and I was watching it on a train, and I had to turn it off because it gets rather explicit and violent, and I didn't even make it to the worst of the violence, but it's a really, it's not a film that you want people to see over your shoulder that you're watching. So what is this movie about? I think you can look at it as a really clear class allegory. It's set at a boys' private school or boarding school. I think what they actually call public school in the UK. It's a little confusing that they're backwards from the US and the UK. Anyway, it's a boys' boarding school where the upperclassmen, the boys, the older boys, are really physically abusive towards the younger boys. And, you know, it's a film that you can look at it and you can say, okay, this is saying a lot about British class and about the abuses of people who are in positions of power. And it culminates in a really violent reaction to that system. A bunch of really fascinating things about this movie. First of all, it's got Malcolm McDowell just looking like a real baby. It's a real early young role for him, 1968. You know, he would go on to do Clockwork Orange, in part because of this role. Stanley Kubrick saw him in If and was like, all right, I want to put you in Clockwork Orange. And you can see a real parallel between those two characters, especially with the wry anger, I would say, the way that Malcolm indicates anger by smiling. It's rather predatory, actually, and it's a really interesting performance. Another really fascinating thing about this film is that there's some black and white scenes, and you might be like, oh, what an interesting artistic decision. And I do think it is an interesting artistic decision, but it's also a very pragmatic solution to a problem, which is that they had very limited time to film some of these scenes. It's easier and quicker to light for black and white than for color. And so they decide we're going to shoot some of these scenes in black and white because we can light them faster and we'll be out of the location because we only have a certain amount of time in this location. And of course, the reason I'm bringing this movie up in this list is because there's a lot of same-sex contact, I would say, in this film. There are scenes, you know, the movie basically acknowledges the degree to which there is, I hesitate to call it homosexual, but I like homosexual in a very clinical sense, same-sex encounters, in an environment where that's essentially your only option for an encounter. So I certainly wouldn't say like the beautiful gay love story of If, but I would say that it's a movie that acknowledges homosexual practices, I suppose is probably how they describe it then, in a way that generally was like, we don't speak, we mustn't speak of these things. And in particular, there's a scene where one of the students, and these are very young students, and which adds another rather troubling dimension to the entire film, where one of the characters is watching a older character in a gymnasium, and it's really easy to read this as a sequence about desire. Now, like a lot of films of this time, there's a lot of room in this sequence in particular for the audience to interpret what they're looking at. I think it's easy for someone to look at this and say, oh, okay, this is a character, this boy is starting to understand what he is looking at and why it is alluring to him. And you could also look at it and, you know, have a lot of other different interpretations. And that sort of coding or deniability, I suppose you could say, was rather common at the time. And this is what gets us, surprisingly, to the movie Ghostbusters, the new one that just came out, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. And I'm going to have a little bit, some spoilers here for this new movie, and so if you don't want the spoilers for this movie, you can skip ahead to the timecode that's on the screen. I would say this new Ghostbusters film is not a movie that I would anticipate enjoying. Anyway, so skip ahead to this time code if you don't want to have it spoiled. No, you know, the movie does a pretty good job of spoiling itself anyway. Anyway, so one of the things that I intensely disliked about this movie, so I went to see it last night, one of the things I intensely disliked about it is, and here comes the spoilers, there is a pretty clear same-sex relationship in this film. There's a character named, I always forget her name, it's Phoebe or Philomena or Philippa or something like that, who becomes romantically interested in a ghost. And I think that is a super interesting idea, a Ghostbuster who is falling for a ghost. What a great allegory for forbidden love and for growing up and for understanding something about yourself that you didn't think was possible or allowed. It's never made explicit, it's never made clear, there's no physical contact, even though there are opportunities for physical contact between these characters. It is always left deniable, plausibly deniable. It feels like we're watching the version that's been stripped of all the queer stuff for international release, or it feels like something that was written in the 1950s under the Hays Code because they're scared to acknowledge that gay people exist. And I found that not just really disappointing, but I actually found it rather homophobic, that I think by stripping out, and if this was a heterosexual couple, I have no doubt that they would be a lot clearer about this love story. But by making it, something that felt hidden and taboo. It's such a throwback to the 1940s or 50s, and it's just so bizarre that they would make this choice with this film. Now, that having been said, there are a lot of bizarre choices that I think really undermine this film. Like I said, I don't think it is a film that is particularly enjoyable, but that aspect really stood out to me as something that I found honestly quite shocking and fairly toxic. That is my read. I'd be very interested for folks who have seen the film, what you think, if that's something that stood out to you, or if you think there's a better way they could handle it, or if you think there's a good reason for them handling it the way that they did. I'm open to hearing arguments in favor of it. It just really stood out to me as something that felt, I felt like I was watching Rope or The Children's Hour, where it's like, nice people don't talk about this kind of thing. And I'm like, what? Why? What year are we in? Anyway, so that's my take on Ghostbusters. And hello and welcome back to everyone who's joining us who skipped over the spoilers. And as a point of comparison to both Ghostbusters and to If, I would point to one more queer film that came out of the UK slightly after Victim. This is about a decade later. This is the movie Sunday Bloody Sunday, another really interesting movie that stars Peter Finch, who you probably know from Network. He's the I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore guy. And also he played Oscar Wilde in the late 1950s. So here he is in the movie Sunday Bloody Sunday playing a gay Jewish man in a role that I think is really interesting and innovative. So the film is about a younger bisexual man played by Anthony Head, the brother of Giles from Buffy, so he's in a relationship with both a man and a woman. The man is Peter Finch, and there's another woman I forgot the actress's name, who plays this woman, and they're in sort of this throupley polycule, which is itself, I think, rather daring for the 1970s. Obviously not that people weren't doing that, but actually putting it in a movie, wow. So this was a very difficult role to cast, the role that Peter Finch is in here. There was another actor, Ian Bannon, I think, who was originally cast, and then he was so stressed out about kissing a man on screen that he dropped out. Like he couldn't get into the character because he was so stressed out about what it would do to his career. One of the remarkable things about it is that the bisexual character isn't a villain. They're not portrayed as like, oh, those bisexuals, why can't they make up their mind? They're always trying to seduce everyone. No, it's not like, it's not the bisexual villain story. He's just a guy who's figuring himself out, and he's not self-loathing. It's very different from Boys in the Band, which was just a year or two earlier, or maybe even less, where it's like, oh boy, these homosexuals, they hate themselves, and who could blame them? No, it's just a guy who happens to be bisexual, and he's living his life and making some decisions that are good and some decisions that are bad. And I would contrast that with another movie that's somewhat similar from around the same time with Michael York, called Something for Everyone. This is a bonkers film. It's Michael York and Angela Lansbury together at last. But in this one, Michael York plays a real conniving bisexual, really plays into that trope of like, oh, the bisexuals, they're just trying to get one over on everybody. It's not a good movie, but there's some moments that are fun, at least, and there is a same-sex kiss, so that's nice. But I would compare it to the much more villainous portrayal of a maybe pansexual, you would say, character. Obviously, those terms weren't really being used at that time. In Something for Everyone, which Something for Everyone, I'd say, is more of a curiosity. Its existence is more of a curiosity than a film that you might actually enjoy, compared to Sunday Bloody Sunday, which I think is actually a great film. While we're on the topic, actually, of Peter Finch, just some fun gossip there. It was around this time, I believe, that Peter Finch was having an affair with Shirley Bassey. That's right, the singer Shirley Bassey, who famous for Goldfinger, among many other things, and for being, she didn't actually say he doesn't have the range. She doesn't have the range, but that's something that she's become known for through no fault of her own. Anyway, so Peter Finch was having an affair with Shirley Bassey around the time this movie was made. Shirley Bassey was married at the time to Kenneth Hume or Kenneth Holm, I forget his name, a gay producer. And so Shirley was in I don't know if you call it a lavender marriage exactly, but she was married to a gay man. And she had a baby around this time, and it is a little unclear if it's Kenneth's kid or Peter Finch's kid. And one more fun detail about Shirley Bassey is that, I didn't know this, but she's apparently from a town called Splot, which is a very fun name for a place. And I was looking up, I was like, what the hell is this place? And so I was looking it up, and the first thing that I read about Splot is that it consists mainly of two regions, Upper Splot and Lower Splot, which is, I don't know, I just find that really funny. So there you go, there's some gossip about Shirley Bassey. So that brings us, with Sunday Bloody Sunday, that brings us up to the 1970s, a full decade after my previous film, my previous video about the film Victim. And the 1970s is where I'm going to be spending a little bit of time for the next few weeks, because my next video is going to be, I'm working on, and unless things really change, I'm working on a video about television of the 1970s, queer characters in particular on television. There was this really interesting phenomenon in the late 60s, early 70s, where things change very rapidly. Portrayals of homosexuals on TV, on US TV primarily, were awfully negative in the early 1970s. And people that we generally think of as, nice guys, like Johnny Carson, for example, and Jack Parr, were actually quite homophobic in their jokes and their content on TV. There were a lot of shows about murderous gays and a lot of shows about, freaks and perverts and all that kind of thing. And gay activists tried really hard to get that to change. And it seemed like TV executives and the gatekeepers, the people who were making television in the early 70s, were like, no, we're not gonna do it. Why should we listen to you? And then within a few years, everything changed. And so I'm really interested in why that happened and why it changed so fast and what we can learn from that. And so I'm going to be drilling down into what happened in specifically 1973 and 1974. There were a series of really, I would say, violent and confrontational moments, actions, that forced television to change very quickly. So that's something to look forward to. And for you, the viewer at home, I'm looking in particular for portrayals of gay characters from the early 1970s. Now, we're, of course, all familiar with Beverly LaSalle, for example, on All in the Family. We're familiar, although she's a little bit later. Roger on All in the Family. There's the big ones, the big ticket ones from the 1970s that we're aware of. But I'm looking for the more, you might say, obscure ones from shows that are not as well remembered. I'm talking about Policewoman, the Flowers of Evil episode, stuff like there's an episode of Harry O that has a gay character. There's an episode of the guy from Hogan's Heroes, Bob Crane. There was a very short-lived Bob Crane TV show. I think it was just called the Bob Crane Show, where John Aston Gomez from the Addams Family played a gay man. So I'm looking for stuff like that. I'm also looking for Johnny Carson making homophobic jokes, sorry to say, and Jack Parr as well. Jack Parr was apparently particularly nasty for a while. So if you've got, especially Carson and Jack Parr, if you've got the Bob Crane Show, if you know of other little anti-gay jokes from the early 1960s, please send them my way, because that's what I'm looking for right now. And also, if you have thoughts on Ghostbusters, I would be very interested, the new Ghostbusters film, I'd be very interested to hear what you think. Leave those in the comments. And if you want to avoid spoilers about the new Ghostbusters, bless your heart, you may want to avoid the avoid the comments for the next week or so. Also, we'll be probably talking about this. Actually, we've already started talking about this on Discord, so if you want to get into that conversation, we're chatting about it, about Ghostbusters a little bit more over on the Discord. Okie dokie, everybody, that will just about do it for now. Thank you once again for all your help and your support and for being a part of this community and for chatting with me and sending me stuff. Love it. Constantly delighted by all the stuff that you have to observe and comment on and send to me. So I really appreciate all your insights and observations, because it really is a group project, all the stuff that I make. It's something that I make, I think very much that I'm thinking that I'm making this stuff in concert with all of you. So thank you so much, and until next time, see you at Fleckman's.
Welcome to Fleckman's Hotel and Day Camp Filtered Brew.
Excuse me, Miss Fleckman.
Ivan Boski, Vander Fluven, Hooven, Meister Garben, Gerben Fleckman.
That's the louse.
I just love happy endings.
Still whining.
How queer.
This is an outrage.
What?
It's called, oomph.
Are you not? Is he, honey? I don't know.
Oh, my.
Did someone call for General Washington?
That's not wonderful.
Well, he sat on my face again.
So the one-legged jockey said, "Don't worry about me, baby. I ride side saddle."
That I'll take them all.
Very good.
Fill it up.
What?
Tits. You're the imposter. We all know it. Case closed.
That kid gets no tip.
What's the matter, Margaret? Jack Frost nipping at your nose?
Look, why don't we cut out all this subterfuge? I know your angle.
I wish I knew yours.
Great job, Maurice. Sorry if the guys in reproduction have been riding your tail.
Well, I'm not.
Excuse me, madam, are you referring to me?
I am not a lesbian.
Yes, and Agnes Moorehead is just a tomboy.
Just keep still.
Hey, Mark!
I'm suspicious, Dad.
Bye?
It means bisexual.
He's bisexual?
The boys were glad to see the girls learning how to make those pies in homemaking class.
Slow, Madge. Have one with me next time.
That'll be the day.
Yes, zips are first. Yes, you're puckered. Yes, puckered.
Think of Mr. Banks. He was just beginning to get used to you.
You mean that bit of wool on your tit?